On Zooms. Welcome everybody who's watching on Zoom. Sorry, we're starting a few minutes late as per usual. But again, welcome everybody who is joining us on Zoom. We're here with our unnamed study class on Wednesdays, just learning about this wonderful program. What's the name of the artist again, Karen? Not the artist, it's like Gilad Bloom?
Gil Hoffman.
Gil Hoffman.
He's something for the Jerusalem Post.
Yeah, and a very well known writer. So he'll be in Bluffton, or is he going to be in Hilton Head?
Hilton Head.
Hilton Head soon. Okay, so
on, April 12th.
April 12th, excellent. And today we're talking about Jewish painters, which is a really interesting area where I am not as familiar as many of the other things. However, I'm familiar with the intro to this, because before we get into Jewish painters, we really probably need to talk a little bit about the little Jewish history on art, which is a really interesting subject. And then we'll get into Jewish painters, which is really much more a modern phenomenon. I think Karen is very, very well versed in this, and I think Larry too, and probably Jeff and Flossie. So what we'll do first, though, is we're going to talk a little bit about the art in the Jewish world and exactly why, when we talk about Jewish painters, we're really talking almost exclusively of the 21st, 20th, and 19th centuries. There's very few Jewish painters previous to this, and I think many people know why, but we'll go over a little bit about that. It has to do, in no small part, to the second commandment. Coming in, of course, the 10 commandments in Exodus 20, you shall not make yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So that prohibition has been a part of Judaism for a very long time, and in many ways has limited our connection to art. And a lot of people use that as saying, well, that's why there's so few Jewish artists. Well, there's not a lot of Jewish painters in history, but there are a lot of Jewish artists. And the reason is, depending where you live and what time period, you may or may not take this verse literally. And we're going to see that at times, like during the Hanukkah story, during periods where Jews, for whatever reason, we'll talk some of them, decided that we're going to treat this completely literally and limit most of the art we do. And I think a lot of the Jewish world think that happened everywhere. And for a long time, people thought it happened everywhere in the ancient Jewish world. However, with the advent of archaeology, we found that that edict was not always taken literally, thank goodness. And how do we know that? Because, of course, of archaeology, we've gone and been able to find out that not everyone in history has fallen under this belief system. So let's first talk about the Bible. Now, remember, we've had this belief from the 10 Commandments that you can't do any art. However, who was considered the very first Jewish artist? It's from the Bible. His name is Bezalel. And Bezalel is the person who was appointed to build the tabernacle. That's the tent of meeting. That's including the Ark of the Covenant. So he and all of the great Jewish artists of that time period, and he is the one. And even though he is an artist, which seemingly should have been prohibited, his name means in the shadow of the protection of God. So he's got basically the protection of God to build this tabernacle, which will not have human faces, but will have animals and combinations of different animals, seraphims, and some sort of angelic characters as well. We know that King Solomon's temple was really ornate with cherubim and gold. We know that Herod's second temple was probably even more ornate than the ancient, was definitely more ornate than the original temple. So biblically, we always knew that there had been artisans and artists. But this edict, really until the 18th century, was preeminent. And we're going to talk about, even though there was an edict against certain types of art, there were certain types of art that did flourish. But what really brought out this idea that different Jewish communities had taken this law sometimes very little and other times not very little were some of the synagogues that were found often from Roman and Greek times. Now, the most famous are probably the Beit Aleph synagogues and the Dura Europa synagogue. And I don't know if anybody's heard of the Dura Europa. It is one in it was a town that was controlled by the Parthians, but I believe the Greeks, but then by the Romans. And they found this incredibly ornate synagogue there. And in the synagogue, they found zodiac symbols, the mosaic floors that, of course, we've seen near Beit Sha'an in Israel, at the Beit Aleph synagogue. And we saw all of these human beings being shown, zodiac symbols being shown. The entire building was basically an artist's rendition of various aspects of Jewish history and Jewish thought. And so we know from the Hellenistic periods that Jews created these type of mosaics and these type of walls because we found other synagogues since. There are over 150, in fact. And if you go to Israel, obviously going to Syria is not possible. But if you go to Israel, you will see, of course, some of these synagogues that have these mosaics, that use the zodiac, that have symbols that are of things we would not consider okay in some ways today, knowing this biblical edict. And so throughout history, we now see that Jewish communities did do art depending on where they were. If, for instance, if you were in a Muslim country and you had art, or you'd probably have less physical representations of human forms because Muslims didn't do that. In Christian worlds, there was a lot of debate as why are there not biblical renderings in Christian worlds and the Jewish synagogues? Because in other places in Hellenistic periods, you see Jacob and Esau coming out of the womb together. You see pictures of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. In the Jewish world. In the Christian world, it's now believed that Jews did not have all of these symbols, not just because of this edict that comes from Deuteronomy and Exodus, but because Jews were very literate. So what does that make a difference? Well, why did the Christian churches and Christian artwork have so many biblical scenes? And one of the reasons is that Christians were not literate. They couldn't read the Bible, where almost every Jew could. Men and women were both literate in the Jewish world, so they were reading the Bible, so they knew the story, so they didn't need these depictions to teach them about it because they knew it. So they weren't getting their information just from priests who could speak and read Latin. They could actually go into the Bible, read it in Hebrew, and they understood it. And even if they were not that literate, they were somewhat literate, but there were literate people in the community. So they were getting directly from. So it's really interesting that is one of the reasons, was because our literacy limited our artwork. It's kind of funny that's kind of ironic in many ways. Now, if you do go to Syria ever, the Dura Europa synagogue is above the southwestern bank of the Euphrates River. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to go to Syria for a while, as there's a war there, obviously, and even before the war, being Jewish prohibited us. But who knows? I'm hopeful in the future that we would. Other scenes that you would find, places where you find architecture scenes, are the synagogue at the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. The Herodian Amphitheater in Beit Sha'an in Caesarea. There's a synagogue at Hamat Tiberias, which has the zodiac circle with the Helios sun god and the chariot at the center. So again, these are zodiac symbols that many Jewish communities would consider definitively something that we're not allowed to do. If you go to the Beit Aleph synagogue, which of course is probably the most famous because of the beautiful mosaic you'll see near Beit Sha'an, if you've been on a trip to Israel, there's a good chance you've seen that mosaic because it's a really popular site, as is the one with the Support synagogue, which also has one. It has one with one of its sun rays going onto a chariot to the horses. And the fact that you see these myths and scenes that are seemingly prohibited in the Bible, but they're also mentioned in the Talmud. So the prohibitions, again, depended on where you lived, what time period you lived. Now, one of the major historical artistic renditions of something Jewish is the Arch of Titus. How many of us have been to Rome? Anybody here been to Rome? Yeah. If you've been to Rome, you may have even been able to go up and touch it. When I went to Rome the one time, they already had a fence around it, so you couldn't touch it, but you could see it. So the Arch of Titus obviously is not of Jewish construction. However, because the menorah is on the Arch of Titus, the menorah, many people believe, became very popular in the Jewish world because of that rendering, because we have a rendering that is very possibly from the actual temple itself. Like that could have been what the actual menorah at the temple looked like. And so if that is the case, that is incredible. And so that menorah is the one that you will see throughout the last 2,000 years of Jewish history, probably till recent times. And that is, oops, sorry.
Is that the one in the catacombs?
No. The one in the Catskills? Oh, Karen.
Catacombs, she said. It's the one right by the Colosseum, I think, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, right up near the Colosseum.
And I'm sorry, it's the one right by the Colosseum. You do find it in catacombs all over the place in certain areas of the Roman world, but also you find it on graffiti. You'll go into catacombs and you'll see Jewish graffiti of people went and did it in the catacombs, which is really interesting because you think of ancient graffiti. Obviously, we've seen some in places, but to see Jewish ancient graffiti is pretty rare. So the different Jewish ceremonial pieces became for a long time where we would find the artists. We'd see it in Kiddush cups and the menorahs, and then later the Hanukkah menorahs. And then also for a wide variety of other things for Havdalah, for instance, so symbolic things. When it came to artistic renderings, especially during the Christian periods where there were limitations, most of the Jewish artistic renderings in terms of paintings or stuff would be from illuminated Bibles and, of course, Haggadahs.
Right.
The most famous, of course, is the Sarajevo Haggadah, which is not from Sarajevo. It's one of the earliest Haggadahs. It's considered one of the most beautiful. It's one of the rarest. It's actually at the archives in Cincinnati. And it's actually from Spain, but it was brought over from Jews probably kicked out of Spain and ends up in Sarajevo. And so a lot of Haggadahs and Bibles have these ornate pictures in them, even though you might say that it would be considered illegal because of this previous edict we spoke about. So it's interesting that the edict against graven images, although is true, that is in the Bible, all is true that people kept that edict, it is also true that not everybody did. And there were whole communities that completely ignored it or didn't think it was literal. And until really the 18th century, we didn't even realize that synagogues probably had these mosaics or that their walls were so ornate. We saw a little bit in Muslim countries, like Spain, for instance, But again, there wasn't a lot of architecture, and there weren't Jews who were going to Spain who could go see these beautiful synagogues in a variety of places, especially in southern Spain, where you go there now and you're like, oh, wow, obvious. But Jews weren't allowed in Spain for several hundred years. So how many of you guys have been to Spain? If you've been to Spain and you've been to a couple of the places there, which are really, really beautiful, Granada, again, of course, and Toledo and Cordoba.
Seville.
And, so all this, and one more time, Seville. So I've been to 3 of the 4. I missed Granada, but you see the mosque, you see the churches, you see the synagogues, and they have a lot of similar architecture and artistic work. So it's really incredible that a lot of us believe that we couldn't have anything artist-like because of this edict that has been all-encompassing in some communities, but certainly not all. And a lot of communities didn't even believe it was supposed to be literal at all. The idea many people believe is that that edict is against purely polytheism. It's basically simply an edict to believe in one God. So you shouldn't have renderings of false gods. And that's it, because we do see throughout Jewish history, some of the artwork that we've had, interestingly enough, has been of gods. So if you go into the ancient world, and we're talking before the first destruction of the temple, you will find symbols of various different gods in the Jewish world, because they were still not quite monotheist. They were monotheistic, but remember, we started being monotheist under Moses, but it really didn't take effect for about 500 or 600 years. Jane?
I don't understand what other gods did they have?
They had various other gods.
Hellenistic, maybe?
But no, not Hellenistic.
Okay.
We're talking ancient Canaan. We're talking the god of El, the god of, the different Canaanite gods mostly that Jews were still using throughout that period of time. Say from 1250 to, 600 BCE, you still find these depictions of animals that were godlike. The pig would be an exception. That wasn't really one of them, but various other ones, the calf definitely. And you'd have all of these ancient biblical gods that we were not supposed to pray to, that we were, because people did not, understand the idea of being purely, for them, you got to remember, they were still monotheistic in a form, but it was still work in process, because they were surrounded by these other gods. And so even in the Jewish world and the Jewish places, you will find depictions, maybe even not really that often, of Egyptian gods.
Yeah, Egyptian.
Because obviously their history, but other gods from the Canaanite world, from the Babylonian world, would make their way down. And obviously El is the most famous, but there are a lot of other ones. Yep.
We were, I just went through some of my old stuff here, and I happened to find something, this brochure, which I'll hold up.
What? Treasures of the Holy Land. Nice.
Yeah, and this was from the Israeli Museum, and it was an exhibit that was put together at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1987 that Jane and I went to. Wow. And what they did was that they collected art objects from different periods. And as you talk about, this is from the Canaanite period.
Right.
So obviously there's not much left. We don't know if they were created by, people around Abraham's time or even earlier than that, but they do it by different age groups, and they do it by the Bronze Age, and then they do it by the Persian period, and the different art, how it was influenced by the technology of the time. I know you spoke about the synagogue. Here's some of the mosaic that they found.
You can't see
I don't know if you could see that one. Yeah, it's hard to see. but maybe I'll make a copy of the brochure and I'll put it online to show. But as you say, there was a tremendous amount of art that was going on at that time, and the Jews were, not ignorant of it at the time, and they adapted different art depending on the technology and depending on the kind of art that was prevalent in, the areas that they lived in.
And also the prohibitions. I mean, the most famous is during the Maccabee revolts, or that the idea of art was very much prohibited by the Maccabees, who were trying to fight the Greeks. And so
that's not easy to see, but this is sort of like a coin, and this was found actually in the catacombs. I'd forgotten that there was art in the catacombs. I thought that, when Jane said it, but she reminded me, and here's a coin that was found, and you could see the menorah. If it's hard to see, but that was found, and this was said it was
that's awesome.
Gold, glass.
Not a Maccabean coin?
Roman catacombs, 4th century AD.
Oh, much later, yeah.
Yeah, but you could see the 2 menorahs, or the Hanukkahs, whatever. I'm not sure if they're menorahs or Hanukkahs, and 2 lions, and the symbol, and it's very hard to see there. The 2 lions surrounded by the Torah scrolls.
Yeah, the line was very fascinating. But also for times like the Maccabees, they weren't so strict. They did not let their people even touch Greek coins, because Greek coins had Greek gods on them. So you were prohibited from even touching these coins. So that's how restrictive they could be at certain times. But again, just depended on the time period. And sometimes they were very liberal and it didn't matter. And other times they're very strict. So we look back, we will see ritual items, post-Hellenistic period, post-Roman period, Byzantine period, you'll still see some, but we really get more into the ritual items, the menorah, the Kiddush cup, the Havdalah sets, then the Haggadah, of course. And those are the places you'll find a lot of artistic renderings. But when it comes to painting, very little. I mean, you obviously have the scenes from Rembrandt of Jews, but very few. And it's not only because of the prohibition in Exodus that's really played, it's because of the restrictions of the Christian world. It's because to become a painter in the Europe where we think about, you had to be basically part of the Christian world and paint Christian iconography. And in Spain, there was less painting in that way in Muslim Spain, where there were Jews there. So you would see a lot of artistic depictions, but they did not paint in the same way and as much of human form as Christians, probably because they looked at that as well. So whereas the Muslim world, you do see a lot of beautiful designs, and you don't see a lot of paintings in the same way. You do see some, but not kind of the amount you see in the Christian world. So, Karen.
I just want to mention something I thought of earlier. You talked about, what was I going to say, about art being used because Christians weren't literate. And I remember from art history that really until the Renaissance, art in general was used for religious purposes, for education of the masses. And it wasn't until the Renaissance that it really became, you saw secular subjects. So go to any great art museum and anything you'll see prior to, let's say, 1600, 15 something, is religious art.
Yeah, even in the Renaissance, we think about it, but really most people still were not literate during the Renaissance.
Absolutely.
I mean, except the Jewish world. They were more literate in the Muslim world, but by the Renaissance, the Muslim world was starting to take a downturn in literacy as well.
Yeah, to add to what Karen has said, I'm interested in stained glass, and I do a little bit of stained glass work. When you go into the cathedrals, that was one of the main purposes, when they started the Gothic style and they were able to understand the idea of the arch being supports, rather than the Romanesque kind of style. So the stained glass now became an opportunity for telling the stories from the Bible where people could not read. So, and they were donated usually by guilds or people like that. So in the medieval times, the 1600s, when they were able to put the windows into these Gothic areas, and put light in. And then it became, I think there was in not Notre Dame Cathedral, but it was Saint Denis in Paris. there was an archbishop there, and he said that the light that comes through the glass is holy light. And he was kind of credited with being the one that came up with the idea that there's a spiritual lightness that comes through the stained glass, and created the whole movement then for basically multiplying the stained glass effect in all of the churches, cathedrals, and even in Jewish centers now. We've adopted the Christian idea. We have many of them in Mikveh Israel.
And again, even in our synagogue, we don't have human beings depicted or God depicted, as will in the Christian world. But we do mimic others. The catacombs, Christians would have gold glass little discs with showing their saints basically on it. And Jews would have the same type of gold glass, obviously the wealthy, except for they would have like the menorah or the Torah or the Ark on it. So they would have the same type of disc, but it would be just a different picture on it. And again, pictures like the pomegranates and the birds and the lions, I mean, these are very prominent in the Hellenistic world, especially at all those synagogues where we see the zodiacs. We'll even see sometimes pictures of humans as well. So art had always been a part of the Jewish world, but not in the same way necessarily as in the Christian world. And that, of course, is all going to change, but it's not going to change. Art is one of the last areas where Jews really become part of the modern world in many respects. Obviously, because of prohibitions, but it comes at the same time. It comes in the 19th century, because what happens in the 19th century? Well, we all know. So in the 19th century, things change for everyone in Europe, especially. And that is because the countries open up, and European countries start to open up to all people to go to universities, to become part of mainstream society. Napoleon really is the one who started this. And so that 19th century at the very beginning is really where we see Jews become of the modern world, just like in a lot of other areas. So we'll look now at, if we have any questions, we're going to look now and take some time to look at some famous Jewish painters. If you know of any or have some pictures you want to show, then I'll just give it to Karen. Did you want to start off?
Well, no, I know you're going to talk about Chagall, I'm sure.
I don't know who that one is. I didn't look him up for some reason.
But a few weeks ago when I had talked about, remember we were doing Song of Songs? Well, I went ahead after that and I put all of the pictures I had taken of the Chagall paintings into a PowerPoint.
Oh, that'd be great. Let's do that.
I have the whole series. So whenever you get to it.
So when we get to Chagall, we'll go through a few others, because obviously he is by far, I mean, on any list, he's number one. He is, and we'll talk about him, but let's talk about some of the others real quick. On a list of the top 20 Jewish painters, he is number one. There's no question. So who would be number two through the rest? And again, obviously, there's some very famous ones that we'll talk about as well, like what's his name, Pizarro.
Camille Pissarro.
But the first, I'm sorry?
Chaim Soutine.
Yes. We're going to first start, though, at who is the first Jewish painter of the modern world. And he is basically called the first Jewish painter, and his name was Daniel Oppenheim, and born literally in 1800. So basically, the first Jewish painter is a man born in 1800. In Germany is an apropos place, because as we know, Germany becomes the center for the Renaissance, for the modern world, really till the till the 1840s, when they start to get a little bit more restrictive. That's why a lot of German Jews move here. But up until the 1840s, really, that is a place. So he went to the Munich Academy of Arts at 17. He studied with Jean-Baptiste Regnault. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but obviously he's very famous, Overbeck. And his paintings became prominent outside of the Jewish world, which was very rare. So that's why he's considered the first Jewish painter, because he not only paints and learns and studies with non-Jews, but he becomes very famous outside the Jewish world. He probably was more prominent outside the Jewish world than in the Jewish world for a while, because he did something also that none of the other Jewish painters did, and that was he didn't convert. He stayed Jewish, whereas famous artists like Mendelssohn, for instance, converted so they could continue. He did not. So he painted a lot of Jewish scenes, which was really rare at that time, and obviously. And he was sponsored. One reason was he was sponsored by the Rothschilds. That was another reason why he became so prominent and didn't have to convert. Now, most of his work is lost, but there's still some that can be found out there in Jerusalem and New York. And we'll look at some of his paintings in a little bit when we have time. If we have time. If not, we'll look at the next one. Another one was Alexander Jeriminsky. You may have heard of these. I just put him number next because he's born in 1850. And he is one of the greats, and really from Poland, where, of course, the largest Jewish community would end up living. And he's in many ways impressionist, but he worked as an illustrator for magazines. And he is, and we'll look at some of his paintings as well. Another one is Jeriminsky David, and he's a 20th century painter from Australia, of all places. I'm trying to get people from different places. He lived in Australia he was born there, died there. And he really became a prominent painter, even though he was from this part of the world.
Wave your hand, you can't see.
Rabbi, could you say his name again?
Right, I'll spell it, because Jarinwyanu. We'll look at some of these paintings in a moment.
And he's from Australia, you said.
He's Australian. That's what I thought was interesting.
And Rabbi, who was the one before that? Alexander?
His name is Alexander and Jeriminsky. I don't know, Gierymski. Only lived to 51, but he's one of the great Polish painters, and that's why obviously where so many Jews came from.
Yeah.
Well, he ended up living in Rome, but and again, he was a realist. So his paintings are something I really appreciate, because Impressionism is not one of my favorites. I know it is, but he is more of a realist, but he kind of doesn't get in. He dies in 1901, so he kind of misses the Impressionist movement, I think. Now, who's the next one? Now, as for women, Friedel Dicker Brandeis, and she continued to paint until she died in Auschwitz. And the reason we have her paintings is because I think she basically handed her suitcases off to somebody right before she went to the concentration camp. And that's how her paintings were saved.
Is her name similar to Judge Brandeis?
Exactly. I don't know if they're related, though. But I want to make sure to have a woman in there as well, because we don't see a lot of women painters until maybe the late 20th century. So she was an exception. Isidor Kaufmann, who lived in Vienna but was from Romania, although it wasn't Romania at the time, is also another one you can look up. He was also a realist, which is a little bit more my speed, because I'm real. But he also, and the painters I'm mentioning actually did paint Jewish works. They painted non-Jewish works as well, but a lot of Jewish works as well. So they're not only great painters because they were Jewish. Of course, some of you may have heard of Hannes Weinberg. He, of course, is one of the kids who died at Terezin. And he was, I think he was taught to paint by Friedel Dicker Brandeis. So he's a pretty well-known.
Could you say his name again and spell it?
Yeah, Hannes Hanus, Hanus Weinberg. He died at like 11 or 12. Hermann Struck was one of the teachers of Chagall. And he was famous for being a portrait artist. So he painted a lot of portraits of Jewish greats and non-Jewish greats like Nietzsche, like Nietzsche, Freud, Oscar Wilde, who wasn't Jewish, obviously, and Einstein. And he was also a Zionist. So, and we haven't got to and we'll get to the Israeli ones in a second. He also did one, I think, the famous portrait of Herzl, which is in Tel Aviv, at the place where they announced the state of Israel, and that's his portrait of him.
Could you repeat his name?
His name is Struck.
Like Struck?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Like lightning struck. Okay.
Exactly. L. Litsky, Lissi, Litsky. And again, these are things I've been looking up. Some of them I've heard of, some of them I hadn't. Was a Jewish Russian painter. So we want to get one of those in there as well, because obviously Russia was the center of so much in the Jewish world at the end of the 19th century when he was born. And again, he was one of the people that Chagall looked to as a mentor, although I don't know if they ever met. He wasn't a teacher. And he had some modern. And then Issachar Ber Ryback was, of course, we'll use him because he's Ukrainian and he died really young, not from the Holocaust. And again, some of these are Yiddish culture, so he did a lot of Yiddish culture paintings. And so now let's look at, now there's some other really famous ones that I'm going to go to a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of famous, we'll go to some other ones that are Israeli, because although they're not probably as famous in terms of these other guys, they're still pretty well known. So let's go to a few of the Israeli ones because you may have heard of them. Reuven, maybe one of the first great Israeli painters. Boris Schatz, you may have heard of him because he started the Bitzalel school in Israel. That was like the early artist colony school in Israel. And so if you talk about Israeli ones, you're talking about Nachum Gutman, who did pastoral scenes. Reuven, of course, you probably have heard of Yaakov Agam. He's become a really, really prominent, and a lot of people know of Agam.
A lot of art auctions that Jewish centers ran had a lot of Agam stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
yeah.
He may be one of,
Sold
after
in,
Chagall, the most well-known today because of
a lot of geometric things that were
Right.
almost like
Trick your
three-dimensional.
eyes.
Yeah, trick your eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Max Liebermann was considered a great German expressionist, maybe even created the movement. Max Weber, was a very, very one of the most famous artists in Germany until the Nazis came and basically destroyed all of his stuff. He survived. He came to America. He went to America, but ended up in Israel.
Chaim Soutine was one of the great Israeli artists. I don't know if you have him down on the list. And
He is on the list. Yeah,
quite a collection of his stuff. And
right. And he studied in Paris.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's
Jules Pasquin, Amadeo Modigliani, although he's not. These are all Israelis that may not have changed their names. So there's a lot of Israeli, and also you gotta put in Judy Chicago if you haven't heard of her.
Yeah.
Very well-known feminist artist, became really prominent in the 70s with the feminist movement.
Yeah.
And so, basically that's what she even did some Holocaust work as well later on in her career.
No.
And then Malka Zeldis is a very famous, but mostly as kind of like a children's book, a lot of children's books, illustrator.
Who is this?
His name was Malka Zeldis, Malcazeldis. He's done other stuff, but I think he's done a lot of American folk stuff, but I think he's more famous as an illustrator.
Yeah, some of these artists are worth a talk on their own.
All of them are. I mean, if you're going to take the 25 best Jewish artists, they
Yeah.
all deserve a talk on their own, and we can do that later. But obviously, if we're going to do one that is more famous than all of them, it is not even close. I mean, Chagall is the most famous Jewish painter, bar none. And he comes from a Hasidic family. They were broke. He left Russia and somehow scrounged money to go to Paris.
Mhm.
And he studied there. He did oils, watercolors. He did modern stuff. We all know, of course, the stained glass windows in Hadassah Hospital in Israel. For many people, that's what made it. But again, and so we're going to invite Karen now to show us a bit. And if we have time afterwards, and we can do this next week as well, look at some of the paintings from the others. So I'm going to give you Karen right now. You should have done
I
that
just want
earlier.
to mention, I was surprised, I did not know this. The beautiful opera house in Paris, it's called the Palais Garnier. And Stuart and I were in Paris last July, and we took a tour of that. And apparently, I forget when, but relatively recently, maybe in the 70s, Chagall redid the ceiling in the Paris Opera House, and it's gorgeous. And see if I can pull up a picture of it. Did any of you know that Chagall had done that? I mean, this
Well, the
man
Met as
is
well.
so-
The Met as well has got a giant Chagall in
Do
the
they?
window of the Metropolitan
you're right.
House.
Yes,
That you can see,
yes.
right through Lincoln
This-
Center
all right.
there. Yeah.
Well, what I'm
Right.
going to show you, hold on, am I co-host now? Hold
You
on.
are. I already made you one. You can put your
Okay,
stuff up.
okay, hang on. I've got it already open, ready to go. So, what these are just the paintings from the Chagall Museum in Nice, and I had mentioned that. I forget what we were talking about a few weeks ago. But I went in. These are all the ones I took pictures of. They're only 17, and they're very large scale works. So these are the actual titles of them that I've put. And by the way, they're all biblical scenes. They're all from Genesis, Exodus, and Song of Songs. That's when I had brought it up when we were doing. So this, I mean, it's self-explanatory, but I'll let you. But he's got a lot of, like, you see Jesus on the cross. So if you look at it, I mean, I'm not an expert on these. I just wanted to share them. Although I'm very proud that Chagall came from the same town in Russia, or what's now Belarus, as my grandfather, and he was about the same. They were actually the same age.
Did they know each other?
I don't know. I always wondered that. I like to think they did, but probably not.
Did you meet your grandfather from that village?
Well, let's see.
I'm sorry, did I?
Did you know? Did he die before you were born, your grandfather, or did you actually get
Oh
to
no,
know
I knew my grand. Oh no,
You
I
knew him.
knew.
You just never asked him the question.
I just never occurred to.
Right.
He probably didn't, because Chagall, as you said, grew up in a Hasidic or a very Hasidic family, and my grandfather came from a very secular kind of family. Anyway, so this is the creation of man. This one's called, well, you see the name Paradise, so it's Adam and Eve. I mean, they're as I say, they're huge works, not small paintings. They're just mural size almost. Can you read that? It's Adam and Eve expelled. I'll just give you a moment to look at them. Okay, this is Noah and the rainbow. So I'm guessing this is Noah down here. Noah's Ark. I guess it's a little out of sequence here. I tried to put them actually in what I thought was chronological.
A lot of people crowded together there in the Ark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, big family.
that's his whole family, I guess. Yeah. All right. This is Abraham and the three angels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When they went to the tent with Sarah,
Yep,
announcing
exactly.
we're going to have a child. Yeah, that's very nice.
Yep. They're beautiful. They're just magnificent. Just
Taking pictures.
the sacrifice of Isaac. Okay, this is Jacob wrestling with the angel. How am I doing chronologically, Rabbi? Am I
Doing
getting
great.
okay? As I said, when I put it together, I tried to do it. All right, and then there's another Jacob's dream. You see the ladder.
Mm.
There's a menorah in there. It's just, I mean, you can study these. Just you see so many images. Moses in the burning bush, and the horns. That struck me. That how.
It's a light emanating, and the same
Right.
word can be used for horn or light. So
Right, exactly. But that's how he was depicted in.
Karen, what were they painted in, watercolor or oil?
No, these are oils, I believe. Yeah,
No,
they're
okay.
big.
No,
Classy.
watercolor.
They're big. They're like.
Windows.
I mean, they're taller than I am, so these are large scale works.
Yeah.
So
Apparently, the horns were kind of also credited with a mispronunciation of one of
Yes.
the popes,
Yes.
who thought that those rays were
Right,
horns,
right.
and when Michelangelo did it,
right, exactly.
mispronounced the word from the Bible.
But I guess they're meant to be the rays. Yeah. So the burning bush, Moses receiving the tablets. I don't know if we. Oh, and there's the golden calf. Do you see it over here?
Mm.
And it's just.
God, you see the hands.
Yeah. Moses striking the rock.
I'm
I'm
just waiting to get into the Holy Land.
Yeah.
Disobey God.
Yeah. Oops, that's all right. That's all. I think there were two more that. Oh wait, I didn't even have Song of Songs. All right. Well, what was I going to? Something else I was going to show you a picture of now. Oh, the ceiling from the. Well, we'll let you know. Let me see if I can find a picture of that while you're talking, Rabbi.
okay.
Let you take it. I'll stop the share.
I
Oh,
don't think
the Paris Opera House.
Yes. Yeah. The Palais Garnier.
I can show a couple others before we finish also.
Anyway, those are. I don't know why I don't have Song of Songs in there, but I'll find them.
in that painting it doesn't hold the same shape, but I've also heard that the horns are actually the crescent moon, but like on their head faced up, so it looks like horns, but it really representing the crescent moon.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not that shape on that specific painting, but
Right. But yeah.
That's interesting.
I just wonder. So if you get to Nice, or it's worth a trip to Nice, for no other reason, if you love art and you love Chagall, go. I mean, it's worth going to Nice.
And she's waiting to get the others. Here's one from Daniel Oppenheim. I just got all these in Google. It's really easy if you know.
Yeah.
And this one is called Return of the Volunteer from the Wars of Liberation to his family. So it's really easy. If you just go to Google, you can get a whole bunch of them if you look up the artist that you want. And you can just put it up here. This is Adam and Eve driven from paradise. It's interesting how these Jewish artists also take the idea of the wings from the Christian world seriously. Whereas
Rabbi,
today,
who are some Jewish artists today?
that I'm not, I mean, obviously there's a lot of them today. And I am not familiar with most of them today because I do not keep, but that would be something else to look at, is who are some artists from today.
I've got a couple here I can show if you want to. If you have a minute, I could show a few Jewish artists from today.
That'd be great. Do you have them with you?
I have them in I'll show that they're on postage stamps where Israel has commemorated different events and arts. And I was going to mention to you,
today there's so many.
Yeah. Anybody remember Howie Fiedler? I'm sure you don't, because he was a member of the Lake Hiawatha Jewish Center. And Howie, every other Sunday, would come to the Lake Hiawatha Jewish Center after the Hebrew school classes, and he would have a stamp club. And one of the things he did was he got the kids interested in stamp collecting, but also Israeli stamps. And I was going to suggest, if you wanted to, I could try and start something with the Hebrew school of trying to get Israeli stamps, because the stamps are
that might be fun to show some of the kids.
Opportunity Now, here are some Israeli artists, modern artists that are on stamps. I don't know if you could see them.
You'll have to take pictures.
You want me to give you the screen share? Oh, you
No,
just
you
took
don't
it
have to. I
yourself.
don't, this is just.
Well, I mean,
holding
there's
them
people
up.
like Judy Chicago and Frank Auerbach and Richard.
Right, I have this one here, Chaim Glucksberg, Leopold Krakauer, Mordecai Lebanon. Now, the nice thing about collecting Israeli stamps, and here's the Chagall windows on Israeli stamps.
That's awesome.
So, but you could see, and they also have it not only for art, but they do it for architecture. They do it for.
These are not only Israelites, because I know like John Hartfeld has a stamp. I don't think he's Israeli. Roy Lichtenstein is one of my favorites. Does he have a stamp?
Well, I don't know if he has an Israeli stamp, but I'm sure he's got stamps that were done in many, many countries.
Right.
I was a member years ago, and I just found this in my archives also, of the Israeli Philatelic Society.
Oh, nice.
And they send out a very interesting, and I happened to come across this one of collecting Judaica. This was one of their inserts that they send out every month. And they'd say that, Judaica is reflected in many topical interests. And it says that, Liberty Bell, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants is on a lot of them. On the Statue of Liberty, Emma Lazarus, Give Me Your Tired, architectural landmarks. Now, I didn't realize there was a connection with the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. One of the architects of that was Israeli or Jewish. Sydney Harbor Bridge, the architect there was John Monash, was a Jewish immigrant son. The Ivory Coast Hotel in the Ivory Coast, Barbados, has a Montefiore drinking fountain. And they go on and on to talk about, Israeli art and also about Old Testament art that's, throughout the world, that you see the symbols of the rainbow, the dove with the olive branch, all of those kind of, on many of the stamps and things like this. But if you are interested, I could, Israeli coins are also very, very interesting for, this is from the Song of Songs, how they commemorate different parts of it, where they talk about the different animals in the Song of Songs, the different state medals that they do. This one is a medal for Sukkot. Each one of these is done by a modern Israeli artist. I don't know if you've heard of, there's an Israeli singer who, let me just find the brochure with her, who is kind of like the queen of Israeli song. Her name is Shoshana Damari. Have you heard of her? But she apparently is known abroad as the queen of Israeli song, and she is also an artist. And she did a song, and she dedicated a painting that she had made as well. We should listen to that song. I'm sure it's on YouTube. It's called The Little Shepherdess of the Valley, and she has what's called poppies, obviously a symbol for the soldiers. Performed many concerts during the Yom Kippur War. A lot of her artwork is very, very popular in Israel, as well as being a singer. So just a few of the things. But if you wanted to, I could really start a little stamp club, and maybe even a pen pal with with another synagogue, where our kids could communicate with them, and we put our postage stamps on and they put their postage stamps on, because every stamp has got a story. And you learn a lot about Israeli history and Jewish history. And
Rabbi, you're muted.
Yeah, just to get it, just to get to see, what they, even if they even know what stamps are these days.
that's true. I mean, you lose the whole thing of even writing a letter these days,
Right.
Because of the internet. Yeah, it's so easy to just punch in a few words.
Yeah, I'm trying to find who are I know a lot of modern Jewish artists, but a lot of them are dead already. Like Judy Chicago, I think, is still alive. But
Well, Judy Chicago, if you ever get to Brooklyn, she has in the Brooklyn Museum of all places, because there aren't too many places that could have housed it, but she has what's called a table setting of about, I'd say, 50 different ceramic plates and table settings on this giant table that's set aside in a room. And each one is done in a theme for basically women's rights. So she has come out with a lot of causes. As you mentioned, she has some Holocaust stuff that is just unbelievably, very, very interesting. I think it's in Chicago. Of all places, Judy Chicago in Chicago, yeah.
Yeah. Well, some of the artists that are living are David Gerdstein, Jakob Agam. I didn't realize he was still alive. He's in his 90s. And Nissan Engel is still, Reuven Israel, Yael Balaban, who I think I've met. Or some that are still living.
Last year, Karen got Ron Roth. I don't know whether he would be willing to come.
Ron Roth, if he's still living.
No. He's a local guy.
Not Roth, I'm thinking of the other Roth.
Rothko. You're thinking
Rothko, yeah.
Not Rothko,
he's dead.
Yeah,
Rothko
he lives on Hilton Head, Ron Roth, and he did a terrific program for us about Jewish artists during the Holocaust and Holocaust.
Oh, wow.
It's just the art of it. It's called the art of the Holocaust.
Smuggled out, and it was.
That was fantastic.
He did a really, really fun.
That would have been
job.
great.
He could probably come to Mikveh Israel and do a talk.
Would you send me his information? That'd be great to see. Sigalit Landau is also living.
Karen, would you do that?
Yeah. Flossie,
Okay.
do you have it?
Rabbi,
You're on, Flossie. Oh, okay.
we're
Or
on
we
there.
can combine the
You're okay, Flossie. Go.
Okay.
two temples.
Rabbi, another branch of art is Jewish architects. There's some wonderful architecture
Yes.
around the world that Jews have started, and this way it continues and it's outside. We see
That I
it.
would need a lot of help because I don't know very little about Jewish architecture. So that's something to think about studying. But before we conclude, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that our next meeting is going to be virtual, but the one after that is going to be live, and we'll send out that information. The subject matter though for the next two have not been set. So I wanted to see what we want to talk about for the ones, and even the live one will be virtual. We're virtual as well, but we have no subject matter for the next 4 weeks. So anybody have ideas of what we want to study?
Could we do more on Jewish artists, but really show some examples? Like maybe,
Oh yeah, that would probably be better virtually. Maybe we could do that. We could continue Jewish arts next week. I don't want to, I think, yeah.
I'd be happy to take one or two of them and put some stuff in.
Perfect. So if everybody wants to look up, anybody wants to look up artists and come up with anybody interested in picking an artist and looking them up.
I'd love to do Chagall.
All right. So Karen got Chagall. That's what happens when you do something first. You get number one right
And I
away.
could do Pissarro also. I'm happy to do that.
If you want to do those, that'd be great. If you want to do Chagall and Pizarro, does anybody want to take any others?
I'll look up a couple of the ones that have been recent, the more recent ones that have been commemorated on the Israeli postage stamps. I'll look up a little. I meant to do that anyway.
There's
Anybody else want to look up anybody?
Flossie, you want to do one?
In the future, I don't know whether or not we would want to look at Israeli playwrights.
That'd be great.
Of course, comes to mind, but also plays like the Dybbuk and, which were early Yiddish theater that led to, to Jewish playwrights, and some of the influences, like Ibsen he wasn't Jewish, but he was a tremendous influence on Arthur Miller, and some of the playwrights might be interesting to talk about.
That would be, you want to do that Israeli playwright. So next week I'll invite anybody who would like, and we'll talk about art, but we're going to show more art next week. It'll be show the artists. The 13th, the live one. Does anybody have any ideas what you want to do for that? We want to do something to Passover.
That would always be current, I guess. Yeah, we could talk about different Haggadahs.
Not only Haggadahs, but
the other things.
And
Yeah.
also, Rabbi, customs of around the Jewish world, how they celebrate.
Why don't we do that for the 13th? We'll do customs of Jewish Passover.
Yeah, maybe we could each bring a Charosis kind of.
That's a great idea.
The That's what the in-person one, right? The 13th.
Right, that's what I was saying.
Each bring a different kind of charosis that we got off the internet.
That's
Moroccan
great.
charosis and, Syrian charosis and so forth.
It was a-
Larry, I would think we should check with the hostess. We don't.
Right, I mean, we should, you're right,
Yeah, it's Paul, it's,
And doing that.
yeah.
Ask them if they don't mind. If we
it's the
brought
Gellerts, yeah, we'll send out the information, yeah.
Okay.
She's called me and he's called about what kind of food. So it's before Passover, so it doesn't have to be Passover kosher.
Right.
But we can all bring russets, herring is kosher. Huh?
Yeah.
Paul and Eva Gellert.
Yeah,
Okay. I haven't been getting any emails, so I don't know who's sending.
I haven't
them.
been sending them, that's why.
Oh, that's why. Okay. That's fine.
I should be, but we're just sending the class. So next week we'll do artists, then we'll do Passover traditions.
Passover, right? Okay.
And
Yeah.
by the way, filet of mignon and roasted duck are very, very ancient Jewish traditions, especially the roasted
Goose,
duck for
goose.
me.
The goose. The
Or
Christmas
goose, that'd be great. I don't think I've even had goose. I think I've had goose liver, but I've never had goose.
It sounds funny, but we had gone to a Christmas dinner and the woman had tried to make goose and she couldn't find the goose in the whole of the area. So she decided to serve turkey, and the richer people served turkey in their meal.
A book club was reading the Dickens Christmas Carol at the time. That's why. And as a matter of fact, he serves turkey. He wanted to go get a turkey. He couldn't get the turkey in Christmas Carol, and he got a goose instead, which was cheaper.
Oh,
Which we
really?
realized, yeah.
How things change.
Yeah.
Flossie.
Rabbi, how do we won't be here next week. It's my birthday. We're going to be away. But how do we get on to what has been taped?
Just email me, and if I can figure out how to get the recording, I'll send it to you. I've had a little trouble with some of them,
Okay.
but I'll send it to you. It's just a
But
link.
it's on YouTube, isn't it, Rabbi? They're on YouTube.
It's on this is on our YouTube page. You can also just go to
Yeah,
YouTube
on
page.
YouTube page, yeah.
And I haven't been writing, I haven't been,
Wrote it down 100 times.
I have to go through the YouTube page and put all the topics and dates and stuff on there, but the date will be there, but it won't have the topic. It'll just say Wednesday study group.
Right.
Right.
This might just be me, but the fact that you said the zodiacs are in some of the synagogues perked my interest.
Yeah, and we could look at
Like-
that. I mean, we have a lot of proof now from these mosaics, and you can find all that online. So we could do Judaism and the zodiac if we want the week after that.
Also, I'm all about film over here.
Yeah, okay.
Don't you want to do Jewish films?
Yes. Yeah.
I just got something from the main Jewish Film Festival that's free. There's two or three films that they're showing online. I'll send that out to
That'd
Rabbi.
be great. We could do a film and then discuss the film. I could do, history of certain, Jewish films. I could do that, something like that. I don't know if I can show clips. I probably can on YouTube. It's on YouTube. So I could probably show clips if you wanted to do, but it'd probably be easier to do some sort of theme because Jewish films is a really
Big.
broad subject. If anybody has any themes, we could do immigration. We could do just famous Jewish films and get a few of the famous ones, but Hester Street and
Yeah, I'd love to show the film Avalon. That
Avalon.
film fits me all, the Barry Levinson, it's a
We
trio.
could do Jewish history through film or something and do that the week after.
Yeah.
Maybe we can have Woody Allen come and talk about some film.
Or Larry could talk about Woody Allen.
I
Right?
did a 4-part series on Woody. I don't know if anybody saw
Well,
that.
that's why I said
Yeah.
have Woody come for you.
I could do a little
He's
talk.
he's persona non grata right now. So we won't have, unfortunately, we can watch his films, but we probably can't have him here. Although we couldn't afford him anyway.
When we're talking about artists, an issue I have heard discussed a little and would be interesting, how the Jews got into cartoons.
That's a
Oh,
great
yeah.
idea. We could do Jews
Oh.
and cartoons and comic books. Have we done that already?
Somebody writing all
A little
these
bit
down?
about it, yeah.
I'm writing it all down.
Good, good.
So we could do that for May.
Where
Jews
that
and
can
cartoons.
follow the artists here. It's a form of art.
That I'm a lot more familiar with, so.
How about Jewish comedians? And we could start with you.
That'd be great.
That would take 2 minutes.
For me, it won't even take 2 minutes.
Jewish comedians, oh my God. That
How
would
did your
be-
talk go at the Ollie the other day, Rabbi? How did we missed it? I'm sorry. The
I think
Ollie,
it was I think it went all right.
that was
It
on
went
film, right?
very well, Larry.
Yeah.
You missed a
Yeah.
very good one.
Oh, great.
I want to say
Great.
hi to Noel, by the way, came in a little late. Want to say hi to you and say hi to
Hi, Noel.
Arlene. I didn't see Ron, but so
I
give him
saw
our
him
best,
for a
Arlene.
minute. Rabbi, when I half made a joke about Jewish comedians, isn't there why Jews went into comedy? And that might be an interesting.
Oh yeah, that's a really important subject matter.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a really easy answer. But we could do Jewish comedians and do the history of Jewish comedy. I've done that many times, so that's easy for me because I don't have to do a lot of studying for it.
Better to lead the discussion. Huh?
Yeah, that's so that's a topic I'm pretty familiar with. But again, it's very similar to. So we'll do. We got next week the Jewish zodiac. No, sorry, next week, a wrong month. Jewish artists. And we're going to do our Jewish arts. It's going to be artwork is next week.
I think I also mentioned I'm now part of a group in Las Vegas that meets on Monday mornings at 9:30 our time, 12:30 Las Vegas time. And it's part of a discussion group from the Jewish JEA or whatever it is in Las Vegas. And every week he sends out articles and we provide articles and from current things in Judaism. They could be recipes, they could be anything. And I think it would be interesting if we had even one or two sessions, every other month or something like that, where you just say, here's, some interesting Jewish trivia almost, or Jewish facts.
We could do Jewish trivia on.
Doesn't have to be political, but it's just Jewish current events kind of thing. Like,
Jewish current events or Jewish trivia?
Well, it's Jewish current events. It's what's new in Judaism around the world. It's what he kind of.
Okay, let's do that in May. We'll do that in May.
Yeah, where everybody looks up something from an internet site and says, "Here's something that I thought was really interesting." Either from.
So right now we have next week Jewish artwork on the 13th, live customs of Passover.
Right.
On the 20th, the Jewish zodiac. On the 27th, Jewish history through film. On May, we so far have Jews and cartoons and comic books, Jewish comedians, and Jewish current events.
Okay, well, we got a full agenda.
And I will send that out because I'll send out when I send out the address for everything as well.
Oh, thank you.
Are you still up to doing every week the Zoom as well as the in-person?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, I think we enjoy it. If everybody else is, I mean, we get everybody here.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we get always 6 to 8 people online, and then there's probably 10 people who look at it later or who are on YouTube, 10 to 15. So I think
All right.
great.
And then in May we'll do another
4, 5, 6, 7, 8 today. Plus that was it's great. Flossie.
I was just thought quickly of something else if we squeeze it in. There are some cities around the world that have some very, what should I say, dominant Jewish features to see, maybe picking a city. And
by Jewish architecture or Jewish history of a city. That's interesting.
Certain cities were or still are centers of Jewish life and just things happening there.
So you want to talk about Jewish cities, like the history of Jews in certain cities?
Yeah.
I think we do that too.
Yeah. Karen did some of that just recently with with Osa Shalom.
Great, because
Yeah,
then we
we're
can
doing a series on Jewish travel.
and our Jewish travel is a great idea too.
Share some of
Oh,
what
she did a wonderful job.
Yeah. In May, then, are we going to have an in-person meeting again, you think, in May?
Yeah, I think we're gonna do it every month. We just got to get that set.
Maybe Jane and I can host that one before we go
Oh,
back.
great! What's a good week? I would set it up right now. What's a good week for you to host?
Well, we'll probably be leaving around the 17th of May, so maybe the week before, if that.
So that would be the 10th
We'll
of
have to
May.
check our schedule here on a Wednesday morning.
I'm out of town that week, that day. I may be out of town that day. That may. Yeah, there's going to be a
How
couple.
about the first Wednesday in May, Larry?
Is that we'll check our schedule and we'll leave.
Okay.
But yeah, that would be like the 3rd or something like that.
Yeah,
We'll see if-
that sounds okay too.
We'll just make sure we don't have any doctor's
can't-
appointments and stuff.
And I may be missing. No, there's like 2 or 3 weeks I'm not going to be around. I'll send that to you. The schedule.
Okay, yeah, send us your schedule and then we'll try and work around
Because I
that.
forget there's 1 week in April, the 26th. I'm going to be out of town as well. I haven't taken any vacation in 2 years, really, so I'm going to take some coming up.
Go, 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 go.
You're
Can
forced
I-
to be with you.
Thanks.
I wanted to mention something. It's totally off today's topic, except that early on, Rabbi, you mentioned the Arch of Titus. And I didn't know if you were aware of this, which I'm at Rome. I recently, when I was doing my immigration class, I actually looked for a picture of the Arch of Titus. I was online on Google. And apparently I came across some articles, and I can't tell you a whole lot about it. Apparently there's a movement or a move underfoot I think in Israel, to do something about removing that sculpture from the Arch of Titus, or something about covering it up, kind of like what we've been doing with statues of Robert E. Lee.
Really?
So you might want to look into that.
I have not heard anything about it.
Just
Hey,
surprised.
Ron. Good to see you.
Yeah. Anyway, just something I wanted to mention when you mentioned
And
that.
I'll have to look that up and see protest
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah.
That could be part of the current events, actually. That could be
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah, and I
current event
didn't
kind of thing. Yeah, that's what I
I
was
didn't have
talking
time
about.
to really look into it a whole lot, but I
Yeah.
did come across some articles about that. So
Well,
All
That's
right, guys. Stay safe. We went a little
Bye-bye.
over the cake. As
Stay
the more
safe.
fun we have. So have a
Okay.
good one. So it's nice to see we got people from
much, Rabbi.
Texas, from South Carolina, and Georgia. 3 states.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye now. Bye
Then
now.
we